In today's episode, we dive into the horrifying story of a group of chimpanzees that escape an enclosure that ended in a horrifying scene after attacking a tour guide, leaving him in a state that no one could imagine. Here is the story of 31 chimpanzees that did the unimaginable. The morning of April 23, 2006 dawned with deceptive tranquility over the lush mountains of Sierra Leone. Gentle mist clung to the emerald canopy of the Tacugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the dense tropical foliage. The air was thick with humidity and alive with the sounds of exotic birds, creating an almost magical atmosphere that had drawn visitors from around the world to witness the rehabilitation of Sierra Leone's most traumatized survivors. Gary Brown, a 31-year-old telecommunications engineer from Texas, had been living his dream working in West Africa. His infectious optimism and can-do attitude had earned him respect among the international community in Sierra Leone, where he was helping to rebuild the country's communication infrastructure following years of devastating civil war. Gary embodied the adventurous American spirit, always eager to explore the real Africa beyond the confines of his work compound. His weekends were spent discovering the natural wonders that Sierra Leone had to offer, from pristine beaches along the Atlantic coast to dense rainforests teeming with exotic wildlife that seemed untouched by the violence that had consumed the country for over a decade. Working in Sierra Leone had opened Gary's eyes to both the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the devastating impact that conflict could have on innocent lives. The telecommunications projects he supervised were more than just technical installations. They were lifelines connecting isolated communities and helping to rebuild a shattered nation. His local friend and guide, Melvin Mama, had become an invaluable companion during Gary's stay in the country. Melvin was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of Sierra Leone's wildlife and a deep passion for conservation that had only grown stronger in the aftermath of the Civil War. Having survived the brutal conflict that had ravaged his homeland, Melvin's own story was one of survival against impossible odds. He had lost family members during the conflict, but refused to let bitterness consume him, instead channeling his energy into conservation work that he believed could help heal both the land and its people. He had been telling Gary for weeks about the Tacugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary, describing it as one of the most important conservation projects in West Africa and a symbol of hope for species recovery in the region. The Tacugama Chimpanzee Sanctuary represented far more than just a wildlife refuge. It was a direct response to one of the most heartbreaking consequences of Sierra Leone's civil war. During the brutal conflict that had torn the country apart, soldiers and rebels had systematically slaughtered adult chimpanzees to sell their meat in local markets, a practice that had devastated wild populations across the region. The orphaned infants, too young to survive on their own, were captured and sold into the illegal pet trade, often ending up in cramped cages in urban markets or as exotic pets for wealthy collectors. These traumatized young chimps had witnessed the violent deaths of their mothers and family groups, experiences that left deep psychological scars that would never fully heal. The sanctuary had been established in the 1990s as a safe haven for these orphaned and traumatized chimpanzees, providing them with specialized care and the opportunity to live in social groups that mimicked their natural family structures. The facility housed the largest collection of rescued chimpanzees in the world, with over 100 individuals living on the 100-acre preserve nestled in the mountains outside Freetown. The work at Tacugama was both groundbreaking and heartbreaking, as caregivers struggled to help animals that had experienced trauma comparable to human war survivors. Many of the chimps exhibited behaviors consistent with post-traumatic stress, including aggression, depression, and difficulty forming social bonds. Melvin's enthusiasm for the sanctuary project was infectious, rooted in his belief that healing the wounds inflicted on Sierra Leone's wildlife was inseparable from healing the wounds inflicted on its people. He had finally convinced Gary that a visit to Tacugama would be the perfect way to spend a Sunday afternoon, offering both an educational experience and a chance to witness one of the most successful conservation initiatives in post-conflict Africa. The two men arranged for Isa Canoe, an experienced local driver who knew the winding mountain roads leading to the sanctuary, to take them on what they believed would be a peaceful wildlife viewing excursion that would provide Gary with unforgettable memories of Sierra Leone's natural beauty. The 30-minute taxi ride up the Serpentine Mountain Road was filled with Melvin's fascinating stories about the sanctuary's mission and the remarkable intelligence of the chimpanzees they would soon encounter. As they climbed higher into the mountains, leaving behind the bustling streets of Freetown for the pristine wilderness of the interior, Melvin shared sobering insights about these creatures that most visitors never considered. He explained how chimpanzees, despite sharing nearly 99% of human DNA, possessed the raw physical strength of up to 7 grown men, how their bite force could easily crush human bones, and how their intelligence made them capable of using tools and solving complex problems that would challenge even educated humans. These remarkable abilities, Melvin noted with a mixture of admiration and caution, made them both fascinating subjects for study, and potentially dangerous when their survival instincts were triggered. He described how chimps in captivity spent countless hours observing their human caregivers, learning the routines and mechanisms that governed their daily lives. They watched locks being opened and closed, studied the movements of their keepers, and demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to remember and replicate complex sequences of actions. This intelligence, combined with their physical capabilities, made them formidable escape artists when the opportunity presented itself. Melvin also shared stories about the individual chimps at Takugama, many of whom he knew by name and personality. He spoke of Bruno, the massive alpha male who ruled the largest group at the sanctuary, describing him as both magnificent and tragic, a 200-pound giant whose imposing presence commanded respect from both chimps and humans alike. Bruno's story was particularly heartbreaking, as he had been brought to the sanctuary as a traumatized infant after witnessing the slaughter of his entire family group. The years of abuse and trauma had shaped him into a complex individual who displayed both remarkable intelligence and deep-seated mistrust of humans, despite the kindness shown to him by sanctuary staff. As their taxi wound through the breathtaking landscape of rolling hills covered in pristine rainforest, Gary marveled at the untouched beauty of the Sierra Leone highlands. The scenery was unlike anything he had experienced in Texas, with towering trees forming a dense canopy that filtered the sunlight into dancing patterns of light and shadow. Exotic birds called from hidden perches, while butterflies with wings like stained glass windows fluttered across their path. Isa navigated the narrow mountain road with the confidence of someone who had made this journey countless times, occasionally pointing out rare birds and explaining local landmarks that held significance in Sierra Leonean culture and history. The conversation was relaxed and filled with anticipation as they approached what Gary expected would be an educational afternoon, observing rescued wildlife in a safe, controlled environment. He had brought his camera, hoping to capture images that would help him share the story of Sierra Leone's conservation efforts with friends and family back home. The idea of seeing chimpanzees up close, learning about their behavior and the sanctuary's work, filled him with excitement that reminded him why he had chosen to work in Africa in the first place. What none of them knew was that inside the sanctuary's electrified perimeter, a catastrophic security failure had just occurred that would transform their peaceful excursion into a nightmare beyond imagination. The trouble had started at the chimpanzees' sleeping den, where a tunnel system connected their night quarters to the main enclosure. This tunnel was protected by what should have been an impenetrable redundant locking system, typically secured by timber stops and padlocks at each end, creating multiple barriers between the apes and freedom. The system had been designed by experts who understood the intelligence and determination of their charges, incorporating multiple fail-safes to prevent exactly the kind of disaster that was now unfolding. But somehow, Bruno had managed to open both locks on the tunnel entrance, demonstrating the tool-using intelligence that made chimpanzees such formidable escape artists. Sanctuary workers later theorized that he had used rocks to bang against the locks, applying the same problem-solving skills that chimps used in the wild to crack nuts and extract insects from tree bark. Even with one lock compromised, there should have been 2 more steel doors standing between the apes and the outside world, barriers that had been specifically designed to contain animals with the strength and intelligence of chimpanzees. In an unbelievable coincidence that would prove fatal, a cleaner had accidentally left not just the second door open, but the third door as well. The worker, focused on completing routine maintenance tasks, had failed to follow the strict security protocols that governed every aspect of life at the sanctuary. With all 3 barriers breached simultaneously, the entire troop of 31 captive chimpanzees had stormed out of their enclosure under Bruno's leadership, experiencing their first taste of freedom in years. The sanctuary workers, realizing the magnitude of the disaster unfolding, were frantically attempting to contain the situation while radioing for emergency assistance from local authorities, but it was already too late. The chimps had reached the perimeter fence and were heading into the jungle beyond. The escaped chimps moved through the forest with purpose and coordination that reflected both their intelligence and their traumatic past. For many of them, this was the first time they had experienced the sights, sounds, and smells of their natural habitat since being captured as infants. The freedom was intoxicating, but it was also terrifying, as these animals had been shaped by years of captivity and human contact that had altered their natural behaviors in unpredictable ways. Bruno led his followers with the confidence of a natural leader, but his decision-making was influenced by years of trauma and mistrust that made him view any human presence as a potential threat. The forest around them seemed to pulse with life as they moved deeper into the wilderness, their powerful limbs carrying them through terrain that would challenge even experienced human hikers. Every sound, every scent, every movement triggered memories and instincts that had been suppressed during their years in captivity. The younger chimps followed Bruno's lead with absolute trust, their social bonds forged through shared trauma and the hierarchical structure that governed all aspects of chimpanzee society. They moved as one unit, a coordinated force of intelligence and raw power that represented both the beauty and the danger of the natural world. The taxi approached the sanctuary's main entrance, where the gates stood ominously closed despite the facility's normal operating hours. The absence of staff members or other visitors should have been a warning sign, but Gary and his companions assumed it was simply a quiet day at the sanctuary. An eerie silence hung over the area, broken only by the distant calls of forest birds and the gentle hum of insects. The usual sounds of human activity, voices, machinery, the general bustle of a working facility, were conspicuously absent, creating an atmosphere of unnatural stillness that should have triggered alarm bells in their minds. Isa honked the horn repeatedly, the sharp sound cutting through the forest silence like a blade. The noise echoed off the surrounding hills, seeming to hang in the air longer than it should have. Gary shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a vague sense of unease beginning to creep into his consciousness. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. The sanctuary gates remained stubbornly closed, and no staff member emerged to greet them or explain the delay. Then, from deep within the dense undergrowth, came an answering call that made their blood run cold. It started as a low rumble, almost subsonic, before building into a bone-chilling scream that seemed to come from the very depths of hell itself. The sound was unlike anything Gary had ever heard. Not quite human, but far too intelligent and purposeful to be merely animal. It spoke of rage and intelligence combined in ways that violated every assumption about the natural order of things. The forest around them suddenly fell silent, as if every living creature had recognized the presence of something that didn't belong in their peaceful world. Even the insects stopped their constant buzzing, creating a vacuum of sound that made the men's own breathing seem unnaturally loud. Gary felt his heart rate spike, as primitive instincts he didn't know he possessed began screaming warnings that his rational mind couldn't yet process. Bruno emerged first from the shadows of the forest, and the sight of him struck terror into their hearts in ways that no amount of preparation could have prevented. His massive 200-pound frame moved with surprising grace and deadly purpose through the undergrowth, each step calculated and deliberate. At nearly 6 feet tall when standing upright, he was a giant among chimpanzees, but it was more than just his size that made him terrifying. His scarred face and battle-worn appearance told the story of years of trauma and abuse, while his eyes held an intelligence that was both fascinating and absolutely terrifying. Those eyes locked onto the taxi with laser-like focus, and Gary felt his soul shrivel under that gaze. This wasn't the curious, almost playful intelligence he had expected from a sanctuary animal. This was the cold, calculating stare of a predator that had learned to associate human presence with violence and pain. Bruno's massive hands flexed as he moved, revealing fingers that ended in what looked more like claws than anything that should exist on a creature so closely related to humans. Behind him, emerging from the forest like something out of a nightmare, came his loyal followers. 30 young adults whose own horrific experiences had forged them into a cohesive and deadly pack. United by shared trauma and absolute loyalty to their alpha, they moved with coordinated precision that spoke to intelligence and planning that no wild animal should possess. Their eyes reflected the same cold fury as their leader, and their muscular frames rippled with barely contained violence that promised unspeakable horrors for anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. Gary initially mistook Bruno for a gorilla due to his enormous size and imposing presence, but the distinctive facial features and aggressive posturing quickly revealed the true nature of their predicament. The chimp's muscular frame rippled with power as he moved, each step demonstrating the incredible strength that Melvin had described during their journey. Melvin's earlier descriptions of chimpanzee strength suddenly transformed from interesting educational facts into terrifying reality as they watched Bruno's massive arms swing with fluid, devastating power, that could easily tear a human limb from limb. The attack began with shocking coordination and explosive violence that demonstrated the intelligence and pack mentality that made chimpanzees so dangerous when their survival instincts were triggered. Bruno didn't charge immediately. Instead, he studied the vehicle and its occupants with the calculating gaze of a military strategist planning an assault. For several heart-stopping seconds, predator and prey stared at each other across the divide between civilization and the wild, while Gary's mind struggled to process the reality of what he was seeing. Then, with a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth, Bruno launched himself at the taxi with tremendous force. His powerful fists hammered against the windshield with the sound of thunder, while his followers surrounded the vehicle in perfect coordination, screaming and pounding on the doors and windows with primitive fury that echoed through the forest like the soundtrack to the apocalypse. The sound was unlike anything Gary had ever heard, a cacophony of rage and aggression that spoke to millions of years of evolutionary programming designed for survival and dominance. The taxi rocked violently under the assault, its metal frame groaning under the incredible forces being applied to it. Gary watched in horror as spiderweb cracks spread across the windshield under Bruno's relentless pounding, each impact bringing them closer to the moment when the barrier between them and certain death would finally give way. The other chimps pressed their faces against the side windows, their expressions twisted with fury and intelligence that made them look more like demons than animals. Issa, immediately recognizing the mortal danger they faced from his knowledge of local wildlife, threw the car into reverse and floored the accelerator with desperate urgency. The engine screamed in protest as the vehicle lurched backward, but Bruno's incredible agility and determination allowed him to maintain his grip, even as the taxi careened backward down the treacherous mountain road. The chimp's hands, with their opposable thumbs and incredible grip strength, found purchase on every available surface, while his powerful legs braced against the hood to maintain his position, despite the violent motion of the retreating vehicle. The nightmare escalated dramatically when Bruno, with a display of raw power that defied belief, smashed through the rear window with his bare hands. The safety glass exploded inward in a shower of crystalline fragments, and suddenly the barrier between civilization and primal violence was gone. His massive arms reached inside to seize Melvin with predatory precision that spoke to intelligence and planning that no animal should possess. The guide's agonized screams filled the air as Bruno's razor-sharp teeth tore through flesh and bone. His powerful jaws, designed for crushing tough vegetation, now applied to human anatomy with devastating effect. The attack was both calculated and savage, demonstrating the chimp's ability to target vulnerable areas with surgical precision, while applying overwhelming force that no human could resist. Gary watched in horror as his friend disappeared into Bruno's grasp, the guide's desperate struggles only seeming to enrage the massive chimp further. Blood began to spray across the interior of the vehicle as Bruno methodically destroyed his victim's hand, his actions driven by instincts that had been warped by years of abuse and captivity into something far more terrifying than nature had ever intended. Gary desperately tried to pull Melvin back into the vehicle, but Bruno's strength was exactly as overwhelming as Melvin had described during their journey. The raw power of 7 men concentrated in one enraged animal whose trauma-induced aggression knew no bounds. With each violent shake of his massive head, more of Melvin's hand disappeared into the chimp's bone-crushing jaws, the sound of breaking bones audible even over the screams and chaos that filled the vehicle. The metallic smell of blood mixed with the acrid scent of fear and adrenaline, creating an atmosphere of pure terror that seemed to seep into their very souls. In a desperate gambit to save his friend, Issa suddenly accelerated forward, the abrupt change in direction catching Bruno off guard and flinging him back through the shattered window. But the reprieve was only temporary. The enraged Alpha and his bloodthirsty pack gave relentless chase as the damaged taxi raced toward the sanctuary's locked gates. The chimps moved with frightening speed and coordination, their powerful limbs propelling them through the forest with an efficiency that human locomotion could never match. Their screams of rage echoed through the trees, creating a symphony of violence that promised no mercy for their intended victims. With nowhere else to go and the screaming horde of chimpanzees closing in from all sides, Issa made the fateful decision to ram through the metal barrier at full speed. The violent collision sent shockwaves through the vehicle, the impact killing the engine and rendering everyone unconscious. In the sudden silence that followed, broken only by the settling of twisted metal and the distant calls of the approaching chimps, they lay helpless in the heart of chimp territory, their fate now entirely in the hands of creatures that had every reason to hate humanity. Gary awakened to find himself alone in the destroyed vehicle, his head pounding and his vision blurred from the impact. The gut-wrenching sounds of Melvin's agony drew his attention to the horrific scene unfolding just outside, and what he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Bruno was methodically mauling the helpless guide while his pack looked on, their primitive social hierarchy demanding they wait for their alpha to finish his assault before joining in the violence. The sight was both terrifying and surreal, as the intelligence behind Bruno's actions was clearly visible in his calculated approach to the attack. Armed with nothing but a wooden log he found near the wreckage and his own desperate courage, Gary charged into battle against one of nature's most formidable predators, his adrenaline-fueled rage overriding any rational thought about the odds he faced. The confrontation between man and beast was brief but decisive, a clash that would determine whether Gary lived or died in the mountains of Sierra Leone. Gary's aggressive posture and relentless assault with the makeshift weapon triggered Bruno's submission response, a behavioral pattern ingrained through years of dominance battles within chimpanzee society. The alpha's unexpected retreat sent a clear message to his followers, who melted back into the forest as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind a scene of carnage that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. While Gary and Melvin eventually made it to safety thanks to a military patrol unit that responded to reports of the incident, their driver Isa met a far more gruesome fate. His body was discovered hours later, mauled beyond recognition by the escaped chimps who had caught him attempting to flee on foot through the dense forest. Bruno himself was never recaptured, despite numerous attempts by wildlife authorities. To this day, sightings continue to be reported throughout the region, and the sanctuary eventually recovered 27 of the 31 escaped chimpanzees, but Bruno and 3 others remain at large. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.